We've got a couple of people gone. Chairman Peterson is up in the North Woods in a canoe. I hope he makes it. And we've got Jessica's out in the Badlands with their kids, I think. And is Chalmu on? Is he online? He's got that new baby now.
Yeah, so I just had a new baby.
Wow. His life's going to change more. That's the second one, I think, if I'm not mistaken. We have before us an agenda. I will also say I had talked with staff. Hi, John. I talked with staff a day or so ago, and we've talked about, can we get this done by 8 o'clock?
Carl, are you done yet?
Carl Key, are you done yet, Carl? So let's try it. I think we're all ready for some breaks, and so let's get it started. I think the first thing is to call the order. We have that. I need an approval of the agenda, which you have before you.
So moved.
There's the motion.
Second.
And the second. So approved. I want the approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
Mr. Co-Chair?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I have a comment regarding the minute.
Okay, terrific.
Do we need a motion first, then we can?
We need the motion to approve, and then we need to ask the question.
So moved.
There's the motion.
Second.
And the second.
Mr. Chair, just a quick comment on 4.2, the preliminary levy discussion. Down on the second paragraph, M. Scallon-Failer commented the business community is now projecting recovery. I believe my comment was based on staff's comment that the Convention and Visitors Bureau said they were anticipating a moderate case. And so that was what my comment was. The business community is not going with the moderate case. So I would like to have that corrected in the minutes.
We will make that correction.
Yeah, that's a friendly.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. Shows you read the minutes.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. We go right into international or the next informational update.
Mr. Chair, can we get a vote on the minutes?
Oh,
Thank you.
all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Same thing. Thank you. Are we ready for information?
All right. Good evening, Co-Chair Peterson and committee members. This evening, I just have a few items in response to last week's questions from the meeting. Again, here we are with deliverables, and we're coming up now on some engagement opportunities and then preliminary levy recommendation, which will be Monday, that Co-Chair Steve Peterson will give a preliminary levy recommendation to the council. So one of the questions from last week for Community Development Department, after they gave their presentation, was what is the percent of permit revenues that are residential and non-residential. And so this is split out in two different ways. So at the top, it's by dollars. So overall, a 3-year average of building and trade permits are about 4.6 million, and about 4 million, or 87.25% of that, is commercial, and then the remaining 12.75, or 585,000 almost, is residential in dollars. But then if you look at that in numbers of permits issued, it's kind of flipped, where a total of 6,719 on average in a year of permits issued, and I'm sorry, a total of 8,464, and then 6,719 were residential, or 80%, and then the remaining 20% were commercial. So that's just a follow-up to that question. And then after the Community Services Department presentation last week, there was a question about public health and how much do Richfield and Edina pay Bloomington for public health services. And so the contracts for 2020 with Edina and Richfield, for Edina it's $275,000, and for Richfield $259,000. And just a note also from public health staff that does not include federal, state, and local grants that are received by Bloomington on behalf of Edina and Richfield. And so the grant funding is estimated around $325,000 for Edina and $640,000 for Richfield. So just to follow up from last week on that question as well.
Excuse me, so
Yes.
you have to combine those numbers? The grant funding estimated is 325 or 640, and that's a combination of city and federal government?
So that would be, the numbers on the bottom are
Yeah.
grant revenues that come from others, like the federal, state, and
Okay.
local grants.
Is that predictable?
I think that is fairly stable, but not increasing. I think you would say, Chair Peterson.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
any other questions?
Thank you.
And then we also have some city staff that are on WebEx this evening. And one of them is the Port Authority Administrator Shane Rudling is joining us this evening. And we have a couple slides, one about TIF districts, and also then one about the tax levy the maximum tax levy that the HRA can enact, or the Port Authority. And so Shane has volunteered to be here tonight just to kind of go through these slides and talk about them and answer any questions you might have. So I'm going to turn it over to Shane. Hi, Shane.
Shane, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here virtually.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we talk a lot about this committee, and yeah, I'm just happy to answer questions people have. It's more Q&A than it is presenting, but I'll do a little bit of presenting. So just generally, I think there's been some questions about TIF districts and how they work. So the city has a number of development districts, which are different than TIF districts. The TIF districts themselves are smaller, and they're outlined on this slide. The biggest one by far, well, it used to be the Mall of America when it was generating regular TIF to the Port Authority. Bloomington Central Station is a TIF district, so the confines of that Bloomington Central Station area generate TIF to the Port Authority. And then the HRA and the rest of the city, as outlined there, has these smaller TIF districts that generate TIF to those projects through the HRA. The development districts like South Loop, also called Industrial Development District 1, an old term from the old TIF districts that were there. Just because a project or a commercial property exists in that larger area, that South Loop district, that Industrial Development District, does not mean that it's in a TIF district. So take, the Polar Fab computer chip company that's out in South Loop, for example. They are in South Loop, but their commercial property taxes go to where they would normally go. They just happen to be in a TIF district, in an industrial development district. They aren't in a TIF district. So you got these big swaths of the city that are these plan areas, these industrial development districts. But that doesn't mean that all those properties taxes are going anywhere different than where they would normally go if they were just in a regular part of the city. The industrial development district boundaries have to do with where you can spend a portion of the TIF money that's generated from those smaller TIF districts. And so that's called pooling, and we can get into that if people want to, but we just wanted to clarify that we've got these big chunks of the city that are in development plan areas or industrial development districts or things like that. But that does not mean that they're generating TIF for all the commercial properties. So is there any questions on that and how that works?
Can you give me an example? Take one of the big TIFs, the Mall of America. Where are those? What's the route of those dollars? Where do they go?
Sure.
Just use a number of some kind, and what's the trail?
So that one's complicated because of some legislation that that was passed back in 2013, and so I might suggest a different district just because that one is frankly unique in the state. And I can get into that if people want to, but if I might just suggest we take the Bloomington Central Station just east of there. It's
Okay.
still a pretty big TIF
Sure.
district. So that's comprised of both residential and commercial properties. And the taxes for those are split out differently. So on a residential property, you've got taxes that are split roughly a third between the county, the schools, and the city. It changes a little bit by the levies and things like that. And then there's a group of other jurisdictions that adds on, under 10%, but roughly a third, city, county, schools, and then I'll just call it 30%, I guess, for easy math. And then you've got another set of jurisdictions, mosquito control and things like that make that up. So TIF takes those three jurisdictions and funnels it to the development entity like the Port Authority for that value that's created by the project alone. So just pretend there's $1 million in value before said project, and then there's $10 million after the project is built. The TIF, those taxes that are generated by that additional $9 million in value, go to, in this case, the Port Authority, and we use that money to pay for streets and roads and utilities and things like that that make the project happen. So it's kind of circular. You have to pass the but-for test, meaning you don't put a TIF district in place unless the project wouldn't normally move forward, but for, which is a legal term, the subsidy. And so that money gets recycled back into the project for adjacent parking structures, sometimes roads, utilities, things like that. The Mall of America came out of its traditional collection of TIF back in 16 and 18, respectively. There's two districts out there. And in 2013, there was legislation passed that benefited Bloomington greatly, frankly. And now the mall is a commercial property. And so commercial property is split differently than residential property. So on a commercial property, the three jurisdictions, city, county, schools, only get about, it ranges between 10 and 15% based depending on the year. And then roughly a third goes to the fiscal disparities pool, which is a metro area sharing pool that Bloomington has paid into for decades and decades and decades. And just as recently been surpassed by Minneapolis as the largest net loser in that program. Because Bloomington developed after the year that fiscal disparity started, all of our value, or most of our value, is tied up in the fiscal disparities pool, and we contribute about $23 million worth of available levy, call it, into the fiscal disparities pool every year, and then that gets split out to communities that either developed before the early 70s or that don't have a good commercial property tax base. So Bloomington has been a fiscal disparities contributor for a long time. In 2013, we got some of that money back to the Port Authority through that legislation. So the mall's portion of the fiscal disparities property tax payment is now treated as TIF by the Port Authority. So the mall TIF districts are still open, but the regular jurisdictions, the city, county, schools, money is going to those normal jurisdictions, just as if the TIF district didn't exist. The TIF districts are technically open for the collection of that fiscal disparities money for use by the Port Authority for infrastructure, parking, and so on. So I know that's complicated, and I'm happy to go into it more, but commercial property is a little bit different than residential property, just because commercial property has a different split. You got fiscal disparities, and then the other third that I didn't mention is the state general property tax. The state of Minnesota gets roughly a third of commercial property tax value in the state. So a third fiscal disparities, a third to the state of Minnesota, and that last third is split up between the three other main jurisdictions and the smaller mosquito control and so on. So that's and the same thing. It works the same way for HRA projects or city TIF districts. There are a few of those as well. It doesn't matter fundamentally if it's a Port Authority, an HRA, or a city TIF district. The rules are generally the same, with the exception of the Mall of America district. Does that make sense?
Well, Shane, I'm the one that's been raising the issue all the time, and my colleagues are telling me to leave it alone. And my objection has been that there comes a time when some of these TIF districts need to be collapsed so that we don't have to sit here on a Wednesday night and try to figure out how we can make an $8 million gap fit when the big pool of money is sitting over there and the revenues from liquor tax and everything continues to run to the Port Authority. So that's my objection, and I'm the one that's doing it. It probably isn't fair to my colleagues to keep bringing it up, so maybe I'll just drop it. Mr. Gibbs, please.
Mr. Chair Peterson, I think you know that I think it is fair, actually. I just wondered, Shane, this is really good, by the way. I was wondering if we could just tease out a little bit that that concept of adjacent, because it might bear on all this. So I take it in the hypothetical, there's $10 million, $9 million of it is the increment of increased value, and that goes back into that TIF district or adjacent for purposes, I don't know if it's tangentially or directly involved or related to the project. I guess the question that's on my mind is, how much leeway does the city, for overall city territory expenses, have to invest as adjacent some of that, or all of that $9 million in that hypothetical, or is adjacent contained to the development district that the TIF is within, or what are those limitations?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We commissioners, Commissioner Gibbs and commissioners. So the answer is kind of complicated a little bit. So once again, that theoretical $9 million in new value that was created. Each one of those projects has a development contract with the developer, right? So the developer isn't going to build a project out of the goodness of their heart. The whole concept of the TIF district and the but-for test is that the project wouldn't go forward but for the TIF. So you got this project, it increases the sewer flow. The project's pro forma cannot handle the cost of that new sewer pipe that's needed for that project. So they come and ask the city for TIF. The city decides, yep, we want that project. It meets our plan goals. And, the vast majority of that money is then dedicated to that sewer. Sometimes we self-debt. Sometimes we issue a pay-go note, which has less risk for the city. Basically, the developer then finances that revenue stream. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. But the vast majority of that money is dedicated to the project. Otherwise, if the project doesn't need the help, then the project just gets built on its own and the property taxes go to where they normally go. So they're all done like that. We're in the enviable situation on a project like Mall of America that we do have a balance there, but that's tied up in the development contract with that project. It's not, it can't be used for general uses. In fact, TIF statute, even for an old district like the mall where the rules are a little bit more liberal, TIF statute is very restrictive on how you can use TIF. Can't be used for maintenance, period. Can't be used for public buildings, things like that. So it's meant, the statute is written, even the old TIF statutes are written very specifically to help get projects built that cities want, and they're only for that use. Now, there is this concept called pooling. So basically, at the front end of a project that might last for TIF district could last for 25 years. You're making the best estimates you can, and you're only dedicating, the money that you think you need for that sewer project in this example, right? And sometimes there's a little bit of extra money left over, and that's called pooling. And so there's limits on pooling depending on the vintage of your TIF district. And you can then use that money in the development area. So in this Bloomington Central Station example, if there was money left over, you could spend that for TIF eligible expenses within that industrial development district, i.e. Southwood in that example. But still, you can only use it for TIF eligible expenses. You can't use it for maintenance of any kind. You can't use it for parks or anything like that. You can't use it for public buildings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The only time you can use it for city salaries is if they're spent managing that TIF district. And so the statutes are very clear on that. There's just can't do it, period. Now, the Mall of America project, we were building up a balance there, and whether you like the water park project or not, but that money was, probably, depending on council and port action, maybe less than 3 months away from closing that deal, and that money would have not been sitting in the bank. I mean, that's the whole the concept of the mall is it's been a successful project, and now the port doesn't have to borrow for these large infrastructure improvements that the city wants to get done out next to it. These great projects that bring in lots of people, COVID aside, and benefit the city by driving hotel taxes and things like that, which we've all benefited from as residents for decades. Now we're realizing the dependence on that, and obviously that's why the committee exists. It's because there is a dependence on some of that hotel tax that I don't want to say we forgot about, but we just relied on it. I think nobody quite thought we'd have it wasn't on my radar, and I helped manage that money. So I mean, we're in the good situation that we don't have to borrow for those types of projects, because the city took a giant risk with the Mall of America way back when, and it's been a successful project. And now we can leverage that project for new uses that we have very, very little risk on. Pandemic's changed a lot of things, but the mall's back up and running. They're open. 80 or 90% of the businesses are open. Of course, traffic is down roughly 50% of pre-COVID levels, but they're working things out with their lender. It's been a tough situation for them, no doubt. It's been a tough situation for us, but COVID will pass, and we will recover.
I'm going to suggest, Mr. Manager, that this is probably a topic that we're going to get in way over our heads. And as much as I'd love to go down that road, it's probably not appropriate on this Wednesday night. Suffice it to say, it's like the scene from the show Chicago when the attorney is saying, "How are you going to get her off?" And he sings the song, "You just razzle dazzle him." And that's what this is to me. And I was effective in setting this thing up when the mall came together, but it's grown disproportionately, and the amount of money that's being spent over there is over the top, and I'm still having trouble seeing where it complements a resident that's going to get hit with this levy increase to make up the budget. So, but that's at another time, and probably is not the purview of this committee, and I apologize for keep bringing it up. So I'm going to move on, if that's okay. And Shane, I thank you for being here. We'll see if the committee wants to bring this subject up again and go any deeper, unless I hear some comment right now. Otherwise, let's just move it. Okay. Thank you, Shane.
Sure. Cardi, so I can do this one too. So, so the levy components for the HRA and the Port Authority are on the slide there. I won't reread those, but the important thing to note is that I always thought they were exactly the same. That's interesting. In any case, very similar in amounts that the HRA receives on an annual basis, and the Port Authority could receive. The kicker here is that the port has never turned on its levy. It exists. It has very broad authority to use that money. That's one of the interesting things about the Port Authority statute, especially Bloomington's, is that the authority is very broad, but the levy has never been turned on. And so that's the number it would be if it was turned on. But another important thing to note here is that if the city and Port Authority decided to turn on 2.6 million in port levy, it would affect Bloomington taxpayers in the exact same way that 2.6 million would impact it through the city's levy. It'll just show up on a different line item on people's tax statements. But it is a tool that's out there, and we've talked about using that. And this is pre-COVID for development across the city and things like that to accomplish the city's strategic plan goals. But it's never been turned on.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, Shane.
Where are we? Carl, is it showtime?
You want to push the button on your...
Just as a preview, in all my years with the city, it's been the Public Works Department that has just been a stellar bull in the whole delivery of services to this city. And it's been dependable and has gone through Russ Langseth and now Carl. So I've been a long time, and so it's a pleasure to have you here and tell us how great you are.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Give it a
and
shot.
Make sure we get your street cleared. So, thank you. So, again, my name is Carl Keel. I'm the Public Works Director. I've been here about 13 years. And before that, kind of for many years before that, in various positions in public works and in engineering around the Twin Cities area. So if with that, in a nutshell, I sort of lump our services into 4 areas. The first are those services that are very directly related to the citizens and to the community, things like snow plowing and municipal water and sewer services and the picking up of garbage and recycling. Another big chunk of services that we do are internal services. So these are services that are provided to the public, but through other departments. And so we charge for those services. I think we talked to you about those a few weeks ago. Include park maintenance, facilities maintenance, and fleet services, fleet maintenance. Another large chunk of what we do has to do with asset management. So asset management, or another term is often used, infrastructure management. This is kind of planning for, cataloging, keeping track, inspecting all the pieces of infrastructure we have. So examples are our pavement management program, where we keep track of the condition, and then we try to develop a program that has the right maintenance at the right time with the overall goal of keeping our service level high and to minimize the overall life cycle cost of that asset. We know that we will always have streets, or we'll always have some type of transportation system. So it's important that we manage it the best we possibly can so that we can minimize our cost in the long run. We do that same kind of thing for our facilities, and in our utilities department, we do the same thing. And then another thing that we do, we build a lot of stuff. So we spend somewhere in the range of $30 to $50 million a year on street reconstruction projects, on building interchanges and building buildings. So a lot of our operations are geared around delivering projects. We have 183 full-time employees, and I would note that that number is somewhat set by our minimum staffing needs in the winter. So basically, what do we need to have our regular operations ongoing and be able to plow streets? And then in the summer, we hire a fairly large number, probably 60 part-time employees. So our number will swell to the, roughly 250 employees during the summer. Our total operating budget is about $85 million. And this budget represents about a 4% decrease from our budget in 2020. The chart here shows that only about 16%, or $14 million of that, is general fund monies. The others are internal services, of which a fair large number eventually become general fund monies. And then the largest portion of our budget is our utility funds. And these are the charges we charge our customers for water and sewer, for stormwater, and for garbage and recycling. Kind of a summary of that $85,000 by these major funds. So again, the general fund about $14 million, and about half of it constituted in those utility funds, and then the other internal service funds. If we were to look at some of our major areas of service delivery, this is kind of a tabulation of those that are in the general fund, that $14 million in the general fund. Maybe highlight a couple. Snow and ice removal. This is the removal of the snow and for the de-icing activities that happen in the winter on all of our city-maintained streets and on the sidewalks, about $3 million. Seal coating. Seal coating is that process where we spray an oil down and put gravel on top, and it revitalizes the street. It's a part of our pavement management program, that whole strategy we have about doing the right types of maintenance at the right time. One big chunk of that is our seal coating program. We spend about $1 million a year on that. The other thing of note is street lighting. These are the many thousands of street lights that are around the city. We spend about $800,000 on that. The majority of those we do by contracting with XL Energy, and we pay them just a monthly rate for those lights. We maintain, and I don't know the exact number, about 1,500 of those or 1,700 of those we maintain, and they're the ones in the city parking lots and maybe in some of our kind of streetscape areas, we call them, like Old Shakopee in France or over here at 98th Street in Lyndale. Kind of specialty decorative lighting are constituted in those. So we're organized into 4 operating divisions, and I'd just like to introduce or to recognize these 4 folks. These are my lifelines tonight, so if I need to call a lifeline, I will call Ellen, who's our deputy director in charge of administration. Julie Long's our city engineer, and she's in charge of our engineering division. John Bradford is our superintendent of maintenance, and Scott Anderson is our superintendent in our utilities group. Public, and I'll kind of run through each of these to give you a sense of what we do in each of those areas. So in Public Works Administration, as the smallest division, go ahead, and we provide the support activities to the rest of the divisions. Ermias is our Public Works accountant. He's in our division. We provide that type of thing. We provide organizational work, special projects, and kind of our safety efforts are run out of Public Works Administration. The biggest service delivery area of Public Works Administration is our garbage and recycling program. And that includes the kind of the weekly services that we provide with collection of garbage and recycling and yard waste, but also our curbside cleanup program that occurs in the spring, kind of a fairly popular program with people, and our kind of growing organics collection program. Currently, we only have a organics drop-offs program, and we're working towards a curbside organics program. Another kind of newer activity within Public Works Administration is our Sustainability Commission and the support of the commission and the sustainability efforts across the city are part of Public Works Administration. Total 6 employees, full-time employees, about a $9 million budget, kind of mostly funded through the solid waste utility. We go to the next one, please, Kari. So again, the activities, the general fund portion of that is about $566,000. That includes the sustainability work. And then if we go to the next, the solid waste is the largest portion by far, just over $8 million. That includes, again, the curbside cleanup program, which is about $1 million activity. Again, that's funded not by the general fund, but by the solid waste utility, which is a utility charge to all our customers. In engineering, we'll keep on going here. So again, we build a lot of things in our engineering department. So we have a section of our engineering called our infrastructure design and construction. These are the folks that design, bid, and actually inspect and lay out projects throughout the community, mostly roadway projects, but a lot of utility types of projects and trails and those types of things as well. This group doesn't build buildings. They build mostly traditional public works infrastructure. Engineering services is, and I would note that in the infrastructure design and construction, the work that they do is funded by a wide variety of funding sources. So the types of things that they receive funding from is they receive state aid money. These are monies that the city gets, about $4 million a year. That is a portion of the gas taxes that are collected in the state. They come to the city. That's used to construct a certain number of our projects. We also get a fair amount of federal money competitively through grant programs, or we may work cooperatively with some of our partners like the county or the state and get funding. So each project has a fairly complicated, typically a fairly complicated funding project or funding scenario that includes many outside funding sources, also includes some assessments to businesses and to our residential properties. A portion of it is also paid for through bonding, which eventually is paid for with general fund. Engineering services, this is the section that does kind of ongoing work in the city, not construction related. The largest of that being traffic engineering. So we have a group of traffic engineers that maintain, design, and kind of monitor our traffic and transportation systems in the city, not only on the roadways, but also kind of keeping track of Metro Transit's type of activities and working on trails and other multimodal kinds of things. This group also does a lot of work with MnDOT in the county and with Three Rivers Park District to kind of coordinate activities between agencies. A big portion of their activities are working with our community development department on development review. So we kind of do the engineering side of development reviews. And we also have a number of people that do sort of land surveying type of work, keeping track of records of plats and subdivisions and all that type of stuff. Water resources is also an important part of our engineering group. This is the land of acronyms. You can see on here there's lots of acronyms associated with water resources, many regulations and agencies that they have to deal with. So much of what they do is kind of coordinating those regulatory things with various state and federal and county and other agencies. They do a number of projects each year, kind of improving both stormwater quality and flooding types of issues. One thing that's somewhat unique for us is that we are part of our own water management organization, the Richfield Bloomington Water Management Organization. And so we operate that technically as a separate unit of government, but we staff that through our engineering department and Richfield's engineering department. So. Engineering has 35 employees, full-time employees. That number grows with interns and part-time people by about a dozen every year, every summer. Total budget without construction projects of about $12.5 million, primarily funded through general fund and the storm utility. The design and construction group is about 17 employees at a cost of about $700,000. And again, they are in charge of preparing and delivering our largest number of our capital projects, and they get monies from those capital projects, from state aid and from the general fund. Water resources, 5.5 full-time employees, $9.6 million is spent. They are entirely funded through our stormwater utility, again, a charge that is on the utility bill of all our customers. In the engineering services group, which is, the biggest part of that is our traffic engineering is about $1.7 million and 9.5 employees. We have somewhat of a arrangement, we do have an arrangement with the South Loop Development Group, so they fund one of our traffic people that spend the vast majority of their time doing traffic modeling and signal operation in that South Loop area. And finally, a small administrative group with about a $500,000 project that supports the activities of the remainder of the engineering department. I noted that a large activity within the engineering has to do with the delivery of capital improvement projects. And kind of the graph on the bottom shows the projected capital projects in the city. And that ranges, from about $35 million a year up to a high of about almost $70 million. So a large portion of the activities of engineering have to do with how these projects are assembled, how they're funded, and so that activity is really not reflected in the budget numbers that we talked about before. This is all outside and done through the capital improvement program. Some of the challenges we have, for some time, there's kind of been a very large challenge with infrastructure funding nationwide, and we struggle with that as well. So we're constantly looking for new ways to find revenue sources for our infrastructure needs. Because that problem is, most agencies have that problem. That same problem is happening with the county and with the state. And we work very closely with both those agencies to deliver their projects. And we're finding that in order to get them to invest in Bloomington, we typically have to spend a little bit of our money to get them to invest their money here. And so it's amazing that we're finding, very notably, we're spending more and more of our resources to help deliver state and county projects. Because of COVID, we're going to experience over the next 2 to 3 years about a 15% reduction in that $4 million allocation we get in state aid monies. That's the projected reduction in that. Workforce, we're finding that fewer and fewer people are actually going into the building trades or into engineering, and so we're struggling to find good employees, good young employees that'll be our future. That's a challenge for us. Infrastructure resiliency, we talk about climate change and the impacts on us. We are definitely seeing a change, at least in the last decade, and project ongoing increases in stormwater concerns. We're receiving much larger amounts of rainfall and in much more intense events, which has an impact on how we build things, and so that's a challenge for us. And the whole, again, I talked about a big part of our business has to do with asset management. And so in engineering, we spend a lot of time talking about how we manage all the pieces of infrastructure that we have across the city. So moving kind of quickly through these, our larger group is maintenance. If we go back one, I just wanted to note that this is Jeremy Klotz. He's a supervisor in our maintenance group, our parks group, and that's one of our new part-time employees that he's training in. So, in maintenance, one large work group is our park maintenance group. In this group, as I noted before, a large portion of their activities are done through an internal service fund and are charged to our parks department directly. But they have a number of other activities that they do that are not charged to the parks department. So the things we do support the maintenance of our parks, kind of a tabulation of the kind of the breadth of things that they do for parks. We also have an urban forestry group. These people focus primarily on diseased trees and management of the canopy within city properties. So we don't have a very extensive boulevard tree program that you would see in Minneapolis or St. Paul, but nonetheless, we do take care of all the kind of diseased trees in the city. Also a natural resources group that takes care of invasive species, primarily in the river bottoms, which is a kind of a growing impact for us, the buckthorn and those types of things that are happening in the river valley. Another general fund activity that happens in parks is the plowing of our sidewalks and all our trails. The median maintenance, these are any of the kind of landscape medians that we have around town, and the mowing of right-of-way areas that aren't adjacent to businesses or to residential properties, which is a rather large activity. Go ahead. In maintenance also is facilities. This is another one that we talked to you already about. It's an internal service fund. This group is responsible for the maintenance of our 60 city buildings. And so we have a kind of a wide variety of people with skills, of boilers to electricians to plumbers, and they do all that work. This is the group also that delivers our building projects. So like Fire Station 3 that was just completed, that was a project that was managed through Public Works, our facilities group. We also provide services to the city clerk's office for the maintenance of the city's cemetery. Street maintenance, this is primarily a general fund activity. Pavement preservation, so kind of typical street maintenance activities of crack sealing and seal coating and pothole filling. Seal coating is a little unique in Bloomington in that we actually do the seal coating ourselves. Many communities hire that as a contract activity, and we've sort of developed an expertise in it. We're rather proud of it, and we find actually that our product is better than we can get from contractors, and we very diligently watch the cost, and we actually do it for less cost than we could contract it. So we think it's a good way to deliver that service. Snow and ice control. Again, I mentioned we spend about $3 million a year on snow and ice control. This is one of those activities, again, that we're very proud of. We've consistently received very high ratings on our citizen survey for this activity, and we find that really it is the one activity that we provide that impacts everybody in the community, and I think we find that people are generally very happy when we put a little extra effort into it. So this is in most events we strive to have all these streets and cul-de-sacs cleared within an 8-hour period. typically they would start at 2 or 3 in the morning and they would be done by mid-morning the following day. This group also does street sweeping. This is an activity that we do twice a year. And those activities in maintaining storm sewers are also done as part of this pollution prevention. These are funded through the stormwater utility, again, a charge to customers. And the final area is traffic maintenance. So these are the guys that actually paint all the stripes on the streets and take care of the signage. We maintain an awful lot of signals, and we actually maintain all the city signals, but we also maintain a number of signals that are owned and operated or owned by the county and the state, and actually the Airports Commission. We have contracts to maintain them on their behalf as well. And I noted that we had about 1,000, I think I said 1,500, the number's actually 1,100 that are city-owned streetlights that we take care of. Fleet maintenance, and again, another internal service. We talked to you about that a couple weeks ago. Maintain all of the vehicles within the city, with the exception of the fire department vehicles. Those are maintained by the fire department themselves. This is an area where we had just completed a service study, a pretty extensive service study last year and the beginning of this year, which again looked at exactly how we were managing this operation, made some suggested changes about kind of the routine for replacing things and how much maintenance we were doing, looked at our staffing. A couple of the kind of key findings of that study were that staffing-wise, we were probably about 2 technicians short of the ideal number for staffing, although we would note that the other piece was that our facility is in very poor condition and severely undersized for an operation of our size. So one of our big capital needs is the replacement of that fleet garage. We couldn't hire 2 more technicians because we don't have space for them. So, until that is resolved, that will continue to be a shortcoming in our area. Again, this is an internal service fund, so the cost, the 100% of the cost of operating these are charged back to the departments that have vehicles. And so we work very closely with them to help them decide which vehicles in the long run are needed for their operations, and then we charge that full cost back to them over time. So again, 89 employees in maintenance, swells to by probably 60 employees in the summer. Again, that number is pretty much determined by what we need for snow plowing in the winter. And then we fill in those extra activities with seasonal and part-time people during the summer. About a $35 million budget. And again, a mix, 10 or 11 million of that is general fund. The remainder internal service funds and storm utility. Parks and facilities of 39 employees at about just shy of $16 million. The biggest chunk of that are funded by internal service funds. Would note a small amount, or not a small amount, $480,000 is paid for out of the solid waste utility. And this is actually primarily monies that are used to pay for the collection of garbage in the city, and also a small amount that we put aside for storm cleanup. We find that we'll have a very, very large storm about every decade, and a smaller storm about every 5 years. And so we try to put aside, have approximately $1 million set aside in the event there is a large event, and our citizens need us to help them collect storm debris. And so I think we are due for a storm pretty soon. I think it was almost 10 years ago when we had our last large one.
Oh, we are.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Our street department, 30 employees. Again, about just shy of $10 million. And the bulk of their costs are actually a general fund cost. Fleet, 12, $8 million operation. Again, 100% internal service fund. And traffic maintenance, 9 employees, and it costs just shy of $2 million a year. That is a general fund expenditure. I mentioned some of our challenges, and I think we talked to you about these challenges when we were talking about internal service funds. our facilities and long-term facility funding is a very large challenge for us. I think it's fair to say, as a community, we have underinvested in our facilities for quite some time. They have or are very close to reaching, many of them, the end of their useful life. And I think that we see a challenge on how we're going to be able to replace or maintain those in the future. One of the big pieces of that is our fleet garage. I mentioned that. That's about a $23 million replacement, so it's a very large, expensive project. The whole issue of sustainability, I don't say it's a fun challenge. We're finding many ways that we can retrofit our activities so that they both cost less and they actually have a much less impact on the environment. So we're constantly looking ways for, like in our snow plowing, we've outfitted our snow plows with fairly sophisticated equipment that monitors where and the amount of salt that we place and when. And so we do things like anti-icing, which is, you may see it, the striping that happens out on the roadway before a storm. People start calling us when they see the striping, and they say, well, what is that? And we say, well, it's going to snow tomorrow. And they say, no, it's not. And then hopefully it doesn't, but it does usually. And so we get out before we anticipate snow, and we do that. The benefit of that is that in the end, we use much less salt because we don't have to put as much salt out to get a clear roadway, because that's a very efficient use of that salt. Likewise, for our facilities, every year we spend a certain amount of time looking at our energy use in our buildings and to try to retrofit with new HVAC systems or with new lighting systems that will reduce significantly the amount we spend on energy. So those are all part of our sustainability efforts. Trails and sidewalks are always, it's a very appreciated service, I think, by citizens. If you look at any of our citizen surveys, that's an area where I think people are looking for more service. And we've traditionally not set aside a lot of money to develop our sidewalk system. We do put a portion of our franchise fee monies towards that, but still probably less than is needed to fully satisfy kind of citizens' requests for a trail system. So that's an area of growing need. And the Minnesota River Valley is a large area. We are spending, through our sustainability efforts, identifying a lot of needs for maintenance of those natural areas down there to get rid of invasive species and to kind of keep them in good shape. So that's a growing area for us as well. Kind of our last division is our water and wastewater division. This is budget-wise, about half of our budget comes out through utilities. But again, none of the activities that are contained in this are part of the general fund, so they're really not part of the tax levy discussion that we're having here. But because it's such a large activity, I think we should probably just bump through it at least quickly. So we produce and we distribute municipal water. Our water, about 25% of our water we buy wholesale from the city of Minneapolis. And so that's money that is treated in Minneapolis and softened in Minneapolis and comes primarily from the Mississippi River. So it's a surface water. The remainder of our water we produce ourselves at our treatment plant, and that comes from groundwater. So from a planning and from an engineering point of view, we're blessed with a very robust water supply system. So if we have issues with groundwater, we can buy more water from Minneapolis, and if Minneapolis has some issues with surface water, we are backstopped by the water that we have from our wells. Quite a bit of hype the last few years about the quality of our water. The folks in our water utility take great pride in operating our water plants so that we have not only a very efficient use of that water plant, but the quality that comes out of that water plant is quite exceptional. The other kind of odd thing, we're not odd, but a special thing that we have is we have the Tri-City laboratory. We have a full analytics laboratory at our water plant, which is something that most cities our size wouldn't have anything close to. And the reason we do that is because we operate that jointly with Edina and with St. Louis Park. And we also operate it as a contract facility for many other agencies and even private businesses that want to have water quality testing or other types of chemical testing. And so we do that at the Tri-City Lab. It's kind of something special about our water utility. We also collect wastewater in this area. This is what goes down your drain and is collected in the sewer in the street. We do not treat that water. That water is sent to the Seneca plant down in Eagan, and which is operated by the Metropolitan Council Environmental Services. Of that budget, about 2/3 of our budget is treatment charges that we pay to the Met Council. So there are about 53 employees in utilities. Again, full-time employees. We'll hire about a dozen folks during the summer. Almost $30 million in combined rates, again, all from rates to customers, billings to customers. So, our operations and maintenance, this is the kind of our field crews. These are the guys that respond to water main breaks, or if there's they're the ones that are out there jetting and cleaning our sewers to make sure that we minimize backups, all those types of things. That's 26 employees. Costs, roughly half of that cost is $15.6 million. And then our water treatment plant, again, this is a 24/7 operation, 14 employees, about $10 million. And again, you can see that we have the water quality side, which is that Tri-City Lab, which is kind of a special thing that we have. And finally, our customer service folks, this is the office staff in charge of metering, meter reading, kind of engineering types of things around water systems. We have a model of our entire system so that, if we talk about a large development in some part of the city, we can put that into the model, decide and do some analysis to see if we have adequate capacity or what types of improvements we would have to make. So that all occurs within our administration and customer service area. A big thing in water and wastewater has to do with asset management. So we were much like our facilities. The bulk of our community was constructed in the 50s and 60s, and we're coming to a point where a lot of that infrastructure is going to need to be replaced or to be significantly upgraded. And so you can see in this graph, this kind of shows our expenditures and our anticipated expenditures, and there's a big bump that happens in the blue line here. And this is we anticipate that we're going to have a significant need to do many more capital programs to replace that aging infrastructure. This was all predicted through our asset management programs, where we have each one of the pipes and all the pieces of our infrastructure cataloged and inspected, and we've anticipated when we expect them to need replacement. And it's been the challenge for the funding of both water and wastewater is we've been trying to set aside money in anticipation of those expenditures that will start occurring, within the next decade. And so that has been a challenge for us in our utility funds. Kind of concurrently, the past few years have been very wet, and I think that I think there's an argument, is that part of global warming or what is that? But the reality of it is, in the last 8 years, we have not had a significantly dry year. We rely on selling water to populate our utility funds, and we've not been able to do that. So one growing concern for us is how are we going to fund these asset needs? We always can bond for them, but that really pushes off the burden to a future generation. And so we've been our initial hope was that we could build large enough fund reserves that we could fund a significant portion of this through fund reserves rather than bonding. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm open for questions.
Who's been writing them down? Questions? Chief?
Carl, the money that we spend on Minneapolis water and the money we spend on our own groundwater, is there a difference there, dollar for dollar?
Oh, considerably. Now, I don't know the exact number, but we probably we can produce water at probably 20% of the cost of buying finished water from Minneapolis. It's considerably more expensive to buy Minneapolis water. The benefit of having Minneapolis water is that, first off, we have that variety of different sources. So we have groundwater and we have surface water that Minneapolis provides. So we have multiple sources. So from a providing service, we have a lot of redundancy in our system. And I think that's the biggest benefit. The other benefit is that in order for us to be able to provide water all ourselves, we would have to double the size of our treatment plant.
Ooh.
So we have, in a maximum year, we would pump about, or in a maximum day, we would pump about 30 million gallons of water. Our treatment plant, we can produce about between 14 and 15 million gallons of water. So we use the Minneapolis system to peak, essentially. So we run our system pretty much as we can all year round. And then when we have dry years, we peak off of that with Minneapolis. Now in our contract with them, we have to use a minimum amount with them, which kind of gets you to this 25% or so water annually from them. But I think it's a good arrangement, provides us redundancy, and it provides us this peaking capacity, which allows us not to have to invest a great deal of money in a water treatment plant.
A second quick question, if I could. The Park District, or the Minnesota River Valley, is having extensive work done on its trail system. Were we involved with that at all?
So again, the kind of the planning for that would have is sort of originated in our engineering division. Yes, so we were very involved in that. So that is a project that is being constructed by the DNR and was the result of funding that came primarily from the state through a bonding bill passed. So that will be, those river trails will be constructed and operated and owned by the DNR. So the city has no ongoing responsibilities for that, other than we were certainly part of trying to advocate for that trail and to help them plan them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please. Josh, why don't you go ahead? You're at the end there.
Mr. Chair, Carl, thank you. Just a few things. First of all, kudos to you and your team on just a job well done as a tax-paying resident here, and everything from the curbside cleanup to the snow removal. I hear a lot of positive things about that, and so I really appreciate it. Just a couple of comments or thoughts. The bikeways and bike trails in Bloomington could be expanded. And as we have to make tough decisions about where do you cut and where do you invest, what's the thinking in terms of long range, how we could build that out to promote wellness and alternative sustainable transportation options for residents?
So there, a number of years ago, there was a committee put together that developed our alternative transportation plan, which is essentially our bike plan. That outlined a system that would provide not the ultimate, but pretty adequate services for trails and for sidewalks, et cetera, across the city. And that had a very large price tag associated with it. So I think it's fair to say that we have not identified or set aside funds to fully implement that system.
Gotcha.
That system was currently being revisited as part of the Parks Master Plan, and I expect there'll be some revisions, but it'll be somewhat similar to what's in the Alternative Transportation Plan. A couple of years ago, the City Council did take a step forward in that we started a franchise fee, which again is another utility fee that is added to customers' electric and gas bills that comes to the city. And we use that to fund the capital program, a large portion of the capital program for our trails. But our trail program has been primarily on trails like the one completed on France Avenue, which is really rebuilding an existing trail. Our next large trail will be on Normandale Boulevard, which again is primarily upgrading an existing trail. So I don't think we are anywhere close to having the kind of funding we would need to fully build that system out.
Great. Thank you. Second question is outdoor ice rinks. I think we may have talked about this last time, or just as an observer with the changing weather patterns, I just have observed less and less use of the outdoor rinks. And I've been told by some, it's not cheap. And so again, this committee has to make tough decisions and recommendations. We have any data on kind of the use of the outdoor rinks and how much it costs to maintain them? I'm just wondering.
I would certainly have numbers on the cost to maintain them, and I don't have them off the top of my head.
Yep.
And I will call a lifeline to John Bradford. He may be able
It'd be
to.
just good to know.
He may be able to help me that, and if we don't have it immediately, we can get you that number. So we certainly know how much they cost to maintain, and we have observed too that many of them, some are used very heavily, and some are not used hardly at all. And I know that this is one of the items that, as part of the Parks Master Plan and with our ongoing work with our Parks Department, they are looking at this as an area that may be one that needs adjustment.
Okay, great. And then, again, tough decisions that this committee has to work on. And I couch this how I started, which is kudos to you and your team. Where do we save money in your budget? Are there places, some of the buildings that we just can't afford? Are there some tough decisions that you want to tee up for this group? If you can't share them tonight, can you share your best thinking? Because I share your concern about the aging infrastructure. It's not only an issue for Bloomington, it's for the whole country, where that's an issue. But of all things, water is an absolute essential. So we've got to get that right. Mm-hmm. But like, how do we save money if we get to a place where we have to make some tough recommendations? In your view?
Well, I mean, so again, I think we will be presenting you with kind of a list of areas where we think that we can make some cuts. I think in those that we will be suggesting are maybe some of more of the service areas. So there are things that we do like sidewalk plowing. We plow trails. Some of our trails, like in our ice rinks, are well used and some are not. Mm-hmm. And maybe we make some decisions about not doing those lower tier trails. That might be, again, that's not a major savings, but we could save, some money there. Other areas, there's always a question of, do you want to cut back on how much we plow? We probably aren't going to be proposing that because we think that that's actually for the amount of benefit that everybody in the community recognizes, it's actually not all that expensive. If you're to look at the cost of that activity per year, for a typical homeowner, it actually costs about the same as having someone come out and plow your driveway for you once. Mm-hmm. So it's a very cost-effective kind of service. I think the other areas are kind of the, maybe I'd call them more aesthetic maintenance types of activities. One thing that we did this year is that we cut way back on our right-of-way maintenance and the maintenance and mowing that we do in our parks. And we expected, frankly, a huge blowback on that because usually people are very anxious about us not getting the grass mowed properly. And I think people have been pretty forgiving about that this year. We cut back on that, and I've been somewhat amazed at the lack of negative feedback we've received there. So I think it'll probably be, our suggestions will be in areas like that are probably not essential, if you will, but are kind of more aesthetic types of activities. The things that I think are also on the table, which I'm kind of reluctant to suggest, is that we could certainly put off construction projects and put off some of our pavement management projects. But again, I think in the long term, we're better off sticking to a disciplined approach of going through our infrastructure and maintaining it. And again, that's kind of a question for how long. So I think you can do those things. If you were to push a few things off for a year or two, we're probably not all that bad off, as long as we're committed to getting back on track. So I think you might see a couple of those types of activities in our suggestions as well.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Maureen? Thank you, Josh. Maureen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Carl, very good presentation. The water, the quality of the water, my son, who has traveled all over the world, continually raves about the quality of our drinking water. He actually will stop by our house on numerous occasions just to fill up that fine Bloomington water. So, But, Mr. Chair, please indulge me. I do have some questions and some comments. Carl, you mentioned under the capital improvements projects on your slide regarding project funding, and you stated the county and state expectation of local participation. So can you tell us what that really looks like in a dollars and cents? What is the expectation that the state and the county are mandating basically your department to do these necessary improvements?
I would say that on like a county project, on a typical county project, in many years past, the city would pay about 10% to 20% of a county project. We are finding that it's probably a 40 to 50% city participation currently in order to complete a county project. State projects, for many years, the city didn't participate much at all in a state project. And now I would say maybe we're in the range of 10% or so. It's a smaller amount, but it's a significant amount because they're very, very large projects. So for instance, recently we reconstructed the 169 interchange. That was a very large project. That was a project that the city had been pushing for decades, and we spent a great deal of money advocating for that project and trying to get it moving forward. Helped with trying to negotiate an arrangement between the state and Met Council and other funding partners to get money to do that. And even at that, I think we ended up spending about $4 million for kind of associated costs with that project.
I do want to applaud you too, because I believe there was another project that the city worked on over on 34th Avenue and off 494 and changing that, which was a significant cost savings, I believe. So
that was a kind of an interchange improvement.
Yes.
That again, the city was the front of that project, and we came up with a diverging diamond. It's a kind of a fancy little interchange that works quite well and was rather inexpensive, and we chased the funds for that and actually funded all of that. So that was funded primarily with our South Loop dollars.
Okay. Getting back to the participation, the 40 to 50% on the city's dime. Is there any way that that can be revisited with the county to change that proportion? And I know we're dealing with that in Dakota County, and Dakota County is now willing to revisit that percent. It's kind of similar, and now they're looking at peeling back. And part of that is because of the CTIB sales tax that they can use for these county roads. And so there's a little opportunity there for additional money so the city doesn't have to bear that expense.
I mean, if you were to look at the county's cost participation policy, which is what you're referring to, the actual amount is less than that. But the trouble is that the county is struggling to find funding for these projects as well. And so we usually end up being an advocate for the projects, and we chase federal funds for the projects, and we try to get these projects together. And so in order for them to to get the county to invest in them, we find that our proportion of the cost goes up. I mean, our choice is to say, well, county, we're going to hold you strictly to the cost participation policy. And then the narrative goes, well, we don't have money to do that project.
They walk away.
And then they go do something else.
Yeah. I guess I guess I should have restated in regards to the transit sales tax and the CTIB money that comes and flows into the county. That money can be used for roads, county roads, bridges, and highways. And I know the city kind of takes some of that burden. Isn't any of that money available to come out here so it doesn't have to fall all on the city?
I think that would be a decision by the county board. In Hennepin County, they use those dollars to develop our transit system, and so they are not spending those monies on roadway projects.
Maybe they should. Mr. Chair, one more question, or actually two more questions. When it gets to the city services, maintaining the streets, I'm thinking of Lindale Avenue. I'm thinking over at Normandale Lakes. We've developed these districts. Has the city thought about going and implementing a special services district to, again, take the burden off our taxpayers?
Yes. And I would note that there are some complications with those. So a special services district is a methodology where businesses can ask the city to set up an area where they get a higher level of service. And those businesses then, in a sense, drive that process. The bad part about it, or the part that's kind of challenging from the city's point of view, is that it's rather easy to set them up. The businesses can petition and we can set it up. It's very easy to get rid of them as well. So when the businesses don't want to pay, they can back out. And if the city has invested a fairly significant amount of money in them, then they have to find a separate way to pay for those. So, and I'm speaking, we had a special services district in exactly the where you mentioned, the 98th and Lindale area. That one was abandoned probably about 5 years ago or 6 years ago at the request of the businesses adjoining. They were no longer supported doing that. Many of our areas, so streetscape areas is what we call them, like the Normandale Lakes area, the majority of those are paid for through our abatement district in Normandale Lakes. So there's outside monies there. And then in the largest proportion of them are in and around the South Loop area, and those are almost entirely paid for by our South Loop development funds.
Okay, thank you. And one final comment, Mr. Chair and my fellows. This internal services fund, every presentation that I hear from the various departments has a various component of chargebacks to various city departments, and I'm finding this. First of all, I'm trying to wrap my head around it, because part of it I see it as just an accounting mechanism of moving the dollars, but are they actual dollars? I guess I'm just really struggling, because these are some large numbers that I'm seeing, and I'm just trying to understand, what does that really, I mean, what is it? I'm having a hard time articulating, but I continually see this, and I see these large numbers, and I'm just struggling to understand, what does that really mean? And is there something we can do within these this internal services fund? I mean, to me, is there money we could use to shift to maybe help with some of the hard decisions we're going to have to make? I don't know.
Chair Peterson and committee members, Maureen, I can answer that question somewhat about the internal service funds. So there's more than one, and that was a few weeks back when we went through the self-insurance fund and the IT fund and the facilities fund, the fleet fund, accrued benefits fund. So there's around 7 or 8 different internal service funds, and they are actual expenditures for salaries and benefits and materials, supplies. And then those expenditures are, so those are actually going out of the city, and then the revenue to pay for those are charged out to the other funds, right? So they're charged out to the general fund predominantly, about 80%. So then it's a way of allocating the cost of all those things. So those different, like for the police department, the true cost of the police department is reflected in that it has the IT charges and the fleet charge and things like that. If you recall, some of those funds, when we went through them, they have long-term models, and we talked about the fund balance or the working capital balance in those funds. So what we did for the 21 budget request and 22 budget request is we held the charges flat to the different funds that are charged out. So in typical years, we are those charges do increase as costs increase in the internal service funds, but for the most part, we tried to kind of hold those flat, and we've used those in past recessions to hold things flat or use some of the fund balance. And for 2020, the budget shortfall that we're looking at, we potentially will use part of the compensated absences fund to help with that. So there's a balance there of having enough. A lot of those, if they're internal service funds, they have balances, like especially for the facilities fund or fleet fund, where they are building it for future capital purchases. So if we're not, if we do use some of that fund balance to help in the reserve, we will have issues later being able to fund those things. And we did do that. We used those methods back in the 2008 recession. And I think Carl brings this up often, where we have to be careful about eating our seed corn, or that it's hard to bring them back up to the levels where they were. And so that's some of the issues with that. But we could put some more information out just to kind of look at those again and what those different funds are and the expenses.
Thank you. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that you get all the interesting stuff. I mean, there's some other interesting stuff, but somehow Carl Keel has figured out how to get the interesting stuff in this city.
I would agree with that.
Good for you. I was looking at sort of the overview and how many different fees and different revenue sources you have. And I heard you say that the part that comes from the state allocation might be $4 million or so less next year. That's kind of an anticipation you're having.
I actually said it's annually about $4 million, and it'll be 15% less.
15%. Okay. So it's less next year, 15%. And that triggered in my mind, I wonder what your thoughts are about in these economic conditions and what you're looking forward. How much pressure do you suppose you're going to see from those various other revenue sources that are fees for arguably services or something delivered? But you have like 6 or 7 of them. Are you anticipating serious pressure on those fees coming in, and where's it going to give if those things in your mind, if those revenues come in short?
We do anticipate, well, in some we would anticipate some reduction. So like in our utilities fees, we've had long discussions about what we would anticipate for water use because of changes in COVID and those types of things. So obviously one of our largest user is the Mall of America. And then our second largest user group is our hospitality industry. And so obviously we're selling less water to them. So in our modeling, we've tried to estimate what we think might be a reduction in water use from those. In addition, I think we've tried to model or tried to guess, is everybody going to pay their bill? And are we going to see a reduction in the actual amounts of payments of bills? And so there is a slight reduction in our revenue to try to anticipate that as well. So those are areas where we would see a reduction. In some of our capital programs, I'm somewhat optimistic or hopeful that we might actually see some stimulus monies come available from the feds particularly. Because there's been a lot of talk about it. It hasn't happened yet. But those might be opportunities to actually move a few of our larger capital projects, like our 494 project is again, it's a state project, but we're very much involved in trying to make sure that proceeds, actually come to fruition. So there might be some silver lining to some of this COVID stuff.
Yeah, so how about the flip side of that? Let's say that the levy decisions put serious pressure on the amount of general fund revenue that's available. And a bunch of your department, it looked to me like, was also funded by either internal services fund or general fund money.
Yeah.
What does that do to some of the fees that you set? I mean, what's your human instinct or your manager's instinct or your sense of how you manage that situation? I mean, does that start showing up in the fees for those various services or not?
Absolutely does. And usually that's a fight that I have with the city manager about what we're going to do for setting utility rates. And we had such not a fight, but we had such a discussion probably within the last week where we were looking at what we would feel from a long-term position would put our water and sewer funds in good shape. And so what we do is we say, well, next year we're going to have an X percent increase, and we have that figured out. And Jamie says to me, well, that's going to be hard to get. What happens if we put that to a 0%? And so there's this back and forth discussion about what kinds of things can we push off capital-wise, or where can we cut in our budgets to make sure that we can present a rate increase that'll be palatable. So yes, that very much figures into our planning. At some point, we need to make sure that we have adequate revenue to take care of those things, again, in the most efficient way at the most efficient time, this whole idea of asset management. So I think I feel my obligation is to make sure that we present scenarios that still keep our assets at a high level of quality, and that we are able to do that at the least long-term cost or ongoing cost.
Right. Although I suppose there's some tension there too, in
Yes.
that least long-term cost might always be you don't borrow anything, except
Yes.
maybe the overall long-term cost in this environment is so comparatively and historically low that maybe there's an opportunity to re-examine how much we save for and fund out of our various funds here, and how much we might, I mean, you alluded to it in your presentation, how much we might actually start thinking about bonding for if they're long-term assets.
Absolutely true.
Okay.
And again, in our conversations, traditionally, we've always been somewhat proud of the fact that most of our capital projects within our utilities were pay-as-you-go.
Yeah.
And that we've not bonded, but for I think $1.5 million project a couple years ago, we haven't bonded anything in those funds. And because of the historically low rates, and also the pinches on our rate increases, that's a tool that we're looking at more and more at using. Is it a reasonable thing to use bonding?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like maybe we've hit that point where maybe that's a riper question than it historically had been. I don't know. Just one last one. I was just thinking about the micro parts of your presentation and the waste hauling piece and administration, and it looks remarkably lean. So do you really just have one employee in that group, or who answers the phone when people say my garbage didn't get picked up?
So we have one employee, and we have a couple partial employees in finance that do the actual billing.
So that'd be
the
a
customer
different
service part of that is primarily in finance.
Okay.
And then our one coordinator who manages the contractor, and then takes quite a few calls from residents as well. It is just one person. I always tease her, or she probably has the highest budget per FTE. $8.5 million is one person.
Good for her.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? I'm watching the clock, and I'm trying to think if I can keep my commitment. Mr. Manager, I've got something I wanted to share at the end, but Mr. Manager, is there anything we should be talking about before we move towards the door?
Mr. Co-Chair and committee members, this is the only discussion item on the agenda, so we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to answer all your questions, recognizing that as we set up with the other departments, this is the first of a couple conversations. I mean, this is the session where we want to inform and provide awareness for the operations of the department, give you an opportunity to ask questions specific to those operations, and then as you've teed up, we'll come back with some recommendations in a few weeks, and then I'm sure you'll have many more questions talking about implications and impacts at that point. But directly to your question, Mr. Chair, this is the only item to discuss.
Okay. I was reminded as Carl was talking, I had been on the city council for like 13 years, and I was elected mayor. And in that first year, I was kind of getting my sea legs on what it meant to be mayor. We had 2 back-to-back massive snowstorms, like 17 and 18 inches, 2 days in a row. It was real early in the season, and I don't know if the plows were ready for it, but I think it took 4 days to get everything dug out. On the 4th day, at our home, in our primary bathroom, there's a 2-room thing, and the middle room is a makeup area where Pat does makeup and some closet, and then beyond that's the tub and the shower in the back room. we had a chance to go out. We had a small group that night, and we were going to get out for the first time in 4 days. I'm just getting out of the shower. There's a knock on the door. Pat sticks her head in the bathroom door, and she said, "The phone, it's for you. It's for the mayor." And kind of snottily walks away and sits down. I'm like, oh, man, I wrap a towel around myself. I have to go to get the phone. I have to go back into the bedroom. I get the phone. I go, "Hello, this is Mayor Peters." And this person just starts ripping on me about the snow plowing. And I listened for a while, and pretty soon I had just had it. And I said, "Mister, I'm sorry, but I have been snowed in here for 4 days myself. Why don't you just call the city and don't bug me anymore?" I put the phone down.
Good plan.
I'm walking back. Pat's at the makeup mirror, and she's looking in the mirror, and she says, "It seems to me, after all these years, you could probably handle it a little better than that." And I looked in the mirror, and I cinched up my towel, and it said, "Seems to me that after 23 years, you'd learn to mind your own business." And off we went that night.
And you're
We
still
didn't
married?
talk again for 2 days, I don't think. But that was the massive storm that you talk about.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can share a storm-related story, I do want to provide kudos. I mean, you've given Carl a fair amount of acknowledgement and his team too, his lifelines who were on the phone. But you know, the service they do in the winter for snow removal and keeping our streets safe and clear is among the best of any cities, right? And I don't say that because I have the privilege of running this town. I say that because it's, you know, we've got evidence to that. Part of that is, you know, and part of the story, the funny story, you know, you might remember a couple of years ago when we had the 14-inch snowstorm in April. Mm-hmm. And I had, I don't get many complaints about snow removal here. And I had a gentleman who was incensed that it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon before his street was cleared. And normally it's 6 or 7 in the morning, right? And my response to him was, look, the airport was closed for 4 hours because of snow. If the airport has to close, I think it's reasonable to think that it might take us a little bit longer to get the routes done here. But one of the reasons we're so effective at removing snow and keeping the streets in good shape is because many other cities follow a standard where there has to be at least 2 inches on the ground before they'll do a call out, right? Our operational standards are, I think you might say, a little bit more flexible in that we trust the professionalism of our maintenance staff to identify when the best time is to get out and treat and then to do call-outs. Because for both the short-term safety and the long-term condition of the streets, not allowing that snow to get packed and then it's hard to get up at that point, it creates unsafe conditions, and it's bad for the long-term condition of the streets. So that's a decision we've made here. That has financial implications. Those are the kind of service level conversations we're going to have. If we're looking at reductions, you know, one of the places you might look is to say snow removal begins when we have 2 or 3 inches, right? And other than that, we're not going to do call-outs because call-outs involve comp time, they involve overtime, right? So those are the kind of choices we'll be talking about. And I haven't seen his recommendations, so I don't know if that's one of them or not, but those are the types of issues that we'll be talking about.
Anything else? I'm going to call for an adjournment.
Mr. Chair, just one quick
Please,
comment.
Chief, go ahead.
Myself and the other co-chair met with Emily Taplin and did our video,
Oh, yeah.
and that'll be coming out, I think, September 8th.
Soon. I'm not sure of the exact date, right?
Yeah, I can add to that. It's going to be, so the community listening sessions are scheduled for September, I think, 17th and 19th, and it will be the week before that. Is
Yeah,
when
it's
it will air.
the week of the 8th, and she said she'd run it for 2 weeks. So that little tiny piece is in place now.
Emily's in our communications division, if folks weren't familiar with the name, so she's working on the video.
And I can add one more thing is the Let's Talk Bloomington digital engagement website just went live today. And so there is the only project that's on that web page right now is the Community Budget Advisory Committee there's a budget survey and there's places where you can put in comments. So we will send we'll send that link out to all of you so you can send that out to your networks as well, and we'll be promoting that on Facebook and our different communication channels. So I just want to let you know that happened today.
Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.